Hello and welcome back once again to After the Credits. Today I was going to go see It Comes at Night, but apparently we only had that one for a week and it's already gone. So if it pops up over at the Dollar Theater anytime soon, I'll go over there and watch it and drop a review for it. But in the meantime, instead I went and saw The Mummy. Now originally I wasn't going to watch The Mummy because I wasn't really a huge fan of the first two Mummy films with Brendan Fraser. I didn't really follow any of the Scorpion King stuff, so I really had no desire to see this either. I was like, well, it doesn't have Brendan Fraser in it. It's not really a continuation of that story, so it's just no real point in going to see it. And then I remember they were doing the extended Dark Universe, because Universal owns all the monster films now, similar to how, Hammer Films used to back in the day. So once I remember that they were planning on doing an extended universe, I was like, well, since this is the first one, let me go watch it, just see where they're going, and then that way, if something from this pops up in one of the later films, I'll at least know what the reference is. And honestly, if this is where they're going to go with the Dark Universe, I believe they're calling it, I honestly kind of wish they would just stop, reevaluate what they're doing, and reboot already, and maybe start with something other than The Mummy, because this movie honestly had no idea what it was trying to be. So when we start out with the opening narration, it actually starts off fairly strong. The story that they're explaining actually makes a lot of sense. And it's like, okay, it's going to be fairly similar to, the Brendan Fraser Mummy film because it had kind of the same premise. Or it was kind of falling in line with, say, a National Treasure or something like that, where it was just a random ancient Egyptian story and how it's going to carry over into the modern world. And then that all kind of does a huge backflip the second Tom Cruise and comedic relief sidekick show up, whose name I don't know. But the second these two show up, this movie is pretty much on a downward slope. Had it just been Tom Cruise on his own, I probably would have been like, okay, maybe they're still going to do something with this. But the comedic sidekick, comic relief character who wasn't funny at all just completely took me out of the movie. And the fact that they put Tom Cruise in this, why? I mean, from what I've seen of who they got signed on to do all these Dark Universe films, it seems like they're heavily relying on big names to be in these films, like Tom Cruise, Johnny Depp, people like that, where it's like they're probably spending more money to get these people to do these films than they are actually putting into the budget of making the film. And I think that could be what ends up hurting them. I mean, when you look at things like why the Marvel Universe is doing so well, it's because a lot of the actors and actresses they're hiring weren't super huge names. Like Chris Evans, prior to being Captain America, was really only known for being the Human Torch in the semi-panned Fantastic Four films. And now here he is being Captain America. Scarlett Johansson, she's been in a lot of stuff, but she wasn't a huge above-the-title player until he was Black Widow. Then it's like, oh, let's start casting her in everything. Chris Hemsworth, again, kind of establishing his career, got picked up as Thor, and now he's a big name in the industry. The only one who was really a big name going into the Avengers verse was probably Robert Downey Jr., and he was on an upswing from his career falling apart, almost as bad, if not worse, than Charlie Sheen's career would do a couple years later. So Robert Downey Jr. is really the only major name that they brought into this from the start, other than Samuel L. Jackson being Nick Fury. But then, most of the other Avengers are people who were established in the industry, but not huge names. Like even Mark Ruffalo playing the Incredible Hulk. He's been in a few things before, but he wasn't really that well known of an actor versus, say, Edward Norton, who was in the previous Hulk movie that ties into the Avengers verse, and then was just completely recast because the director didn't want to deal with this bullshit. So the Avengers verse is being that starting ground for a lot of people who, outside of that, we probably wouldn't have paid that much attention to. Where with the Dark Universe, it seems like let's cash in on every big name we can to get people to come see these movies just based off these big names. And I'm sorry, but Tom Cruise just isn't that big of a draw to me anymore. Honestly, he never really has been. Ever since he went crazy and started doing the jumping on Oprah's couch thing, he kind of fell off. The only thing I know that people still watch him in is maybe the Mission Impossible movies, and even those have kind of run their course. When they said they were coming out with another one, I was like, who went and saw the previous one? Was it Ghost Protocol or whatever? I don't remember anyone really going to see that. I don't really remember seeing that many reviews about it. And yet, here's Tom Cruise making another Mission Impossible film, and now he's going to be the main starring character in The Mummy and part of this whole Dark Universe. And I just don't really see the point. I think they probably would have been better off had they gone with some unknowns and tried to introduce new people the same way that the Marvel Universe was doing. Or even like the DC universe is kind of doing. Like a lot of the people in Suicide Squad, only really like Will Smith was the most well-known name from that. A lot of the other people, I can't honestly think of much I've seen them in before. I mean, the guy that played Nick Flag, I've seen him in a couple things. Obviously, Margot Robbie was in Wolf of Wall Street. But aside from them, who were a lot of these other people? Henry Cavill, what was he in prior to Man of Steel and Batman v Superman? Gal Gadot, where did she come from? You know, she's kind of, here's a new name, you know, just for the exotic look of her, when there's plenty of established actresses that could have easily played that part. For example, I think one of the names they threw around at one point was Catherine Zeta-Jones. Has the right build, has the foreign accent, has the exotic look to her. Would she have made a good Wonder Woman? Probably not. But, you know, she's someone they could have thrown in there to cash in on a name value versus a Gal Gadot who not many people were familiar with. The only real big name so far in that franchise, again, like I said, other than Will Smith being Deadshot, would have been Ben Affleck as Batman. But yeah, there's a lot of huge names signed onto this Dark Universe, and I think that's what's going to end up hurting the Dark Universe more than the Mummy bombing as bad as it did. Had they not went with all these big names, went with some lesser known people, and had this be the establishment of their career, spend a little bit more time developing the script and find out what the hell you want it to be, and not just trying to cash in on everything. It could be good, but the way it's going right now, I don't see this universe coming to completion. And that's a bad thing about when a studio tries to develop a universe. And that's one thing that's made Justice League take so long to happen is, are these movies going to be enough to establish a universe, have everything cross over and link up, and keep people interested enough to continue going to see them until we complete telling our story? So far, Marvel's been doing good at it, up through, what are they, in phase 3 now, going into phase 4. Where does it go beyond that? That's up to them, but they had a story they want to tell, and so far they're getting there. They've changed a couple of things, like Inhumans became a TV show now instead of a movie, because it's easier to establish Inhumans as a TV series than trying to cram it all into a 2-hour movie. I'm kind of disappointed that they did have to turn Inhumans into a TV series and not kept the movie, but at the same time, I understand why they did it. But the thing with the Mummy, I don't see the Dark Universe making it all the way to its final stage, whatever that might be. I think they'll get a few movies in, and then it'll just be like, yeah, these are flopping too hard. Unless something amazing happens with the next couple films, which I'm not sure what even is next in the lineup. But unless something amazing happens with those, I don't see this universe coming to completion. It's one thing when you have a series that you just don't complete, like Ender's Game or like, say, the Aragon series. They were going to do all those movies. They did the first one. Wasn't that great. They didn't do any more. The Percy Jackson films, they did the first one. They waited 10 years before they did the second one. And then they decided not to finish it. And then when they were going to finish it again, all the actors were like, we're kind of old to be playing the parts that you want us to play. So without recasting or completely rebooting, this is kind of dead in the water. Hellboy was supposed to have a third film. Ron Perlman was still pushing hard to get that third film made, and now they've decided to reboot it instead. Could have just gave us the third movie, then went into the reboot. Probably would have been fine. You know, 2020 could have had the reboot and had the third one done and out by now. But no, they decided to just trash the third one and do a reboot. So it's one thing when it's a series of films that's all the same story. Like, had we had Iron Man 1 and 2, and then they're like, oh, these are kind of flopping, let's not do a third one. That would have been one thing. But when you're enveloping this entire universe like they're trying to do with Marvel, with DC, and now with the Dark Universe, if you don't have a strong start, you're not going to make it. And I just realized I've been talking for 15 minutes and haven't even told you anything that happens in The Mummy. So, like I said, Tom Cruise and comic relief sidekicks show up, and basically they're military operatives who are trying to find some hidden treasure and sell it on the black market and make some money, and they end up getting caught. But what they end up finding is like this huge find, so the military has to kind of like escort these scientists or archaeologists or whatever for a limited time because they're in an insurgent area where it's like, okay, we only have a limited window where you guys got to get in here, get whatever information you need, and we got to get out. So they're doing all that, and they find the sarcophagus of the mummy, which we already know who she is because that's all told during the opening narration before Tom Cruise and comic relief sidekicks show up. So then, at this point, we stop being the Mummy and move into being League of Extraordinary Gentlemen because we find out that this archaeologist woman works for this organization who searches out all the monsters of the world and destroys them or keeps them under wraps or whatever. As she's escorting Tom Cruise into their headquarters and everything's being explained to him, we see like the hand of the merman from the creature from the Black Lagoon. We see a skull with fangs, obviously Dracula. And there's a couple other, like, references to other movies in there. And it's like, okay, so is this establishing that we've already dealt with these characters and they're not going to appear because they're part of the Dark Universe, so are we going to go backwards in time and tell their story, but then how does it all merge together? So again, already it's a big messy crapshoot of what's going on. And then we meet the head of the organization that this archaeologist works for, who's Dr. Jekyll. And, of course, Dr. Jekyll has a Mr. Hyde side, so Tom Cruise has a 15-minute fight scene with Mr. Hyde for no fucking reason in the Mummy movie. So then we actually get back to the whole point of the Mummy film, and I'm gonna spoil the ending for you because, honestly, I doubt you'll sit through the whole thing to even get to it. But the whole thing is, the Mummy wants to stab Tom Cruise with this knife so that he can embody the spirit of, I believe it was Set or one of the other Egyptian gods, who really it should have been Anubis because they're portraying him as the god of death, which would have been Anubis, not Set, but whatever, he's supposed to be Set, I believe. So they're trying to stop her from stabbing him with this knife, and ultimately they're like, well, our plan to stop her from stabbing you with the knife is for us to stab you with the knife, because then some dumb shit will happen, and then we can kill you and break the curse. And it's just like, what the fuck is going on here? That makes no sense at all. Then, of course, a bunch of bullshit happens, and it ends up the girl Tom Cruise is in love with is gonna die, and then the mummy lady tells him, you know, you'll have control over life and death if you let me stab you with the knife. Plus, Tom Cruise doesn't want her to stab him with the knife because then she'll have control over him. So then Tom Cruise decides to stab himself with the knife and still embody the spirit of Set so that he'll have control over life and death, but he's in control of himself because he stabbed himself, so he's his own master. And then he can bring back to life the girl that he loves that died, even though their romance is like really heavily shoehorned in. And then Tom Cruise is just this weird monster. And then he resurrects his comic relief sidekick who died earlier on but was appearing to him as a ghost. He's been resurrected. And now they're just like traveling through the desert doing fuck I don't know what. But they're like, oh, let's just go on this adventure and see where it takes us. And it's like, this makes no fucking sense of what's going on. And literally, I've talked to you guys for 15 minutes about why I feel this universe is going to fail. And the last 2 minutes, I've just told you the entire movie, from start to finish, without having to go too much in depth of anything. It starts out strong. We meet Tom Cruise and stupid sidekick comic relief character Jar Jar Binks reimagined. Then we turn into League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but worse because League of Extraordinary Gentlemen actually had a plot line behind it, even though some people didn't like it. Then we have a 15-minute battle with Mr. Hyde in a Mummy movie. Then Tom Cruise stabs himself to save the woman that he loves that he barely knows, and that kills the mummy, and then he's just kind of wandering the desert. That is the entire fucking movie. I shit you not. How is it going to tie into the others? I really don't know, but there it is. Honestly, I kind of wish they would have scrapped Tom Cruise, got a hold of Brendan Fraser, said, hey, we're going to bring you back and do another Mummy movie, and just had it be a continuation off the old Mummy movies that now lead into the Dark Universe. But they didn't do that because this is supposed to be a reboot, but then people tell me that, like, a certain scene in here ties back to Brendan Fraser's Mummy films, but like I said, it's been so long since I watched those and I wasn't a huge fan of them. I couldn't tell you what that tie-in was, but if you're going to tie it into, hey, the Mummy movies are all canon, which means the Scorpion King movies are all canon to the Dark Universe, why not just bring back Brendan Fraser? I'm sure the guy needs the work. I'm sure he needs the money. He hasn't been around in a long time. Don't convolute it with all this other bullshit. Okay, you look at things like Kong Skull Island. They didn't spend half the fucking movie trying to introduce the fact that Godzilla exists so they can have the Godzilla King Kong crossover movie later. It was a 5-second thing after the credits. It's like, oh, hey, by the way, Kong wasn't the only big beast. All this other shit exists, and you're going to help us find it and do something with it. That's perfect tie-in. You could have went through this entire Mummy movie, and then at the end, revealed that the guy who was leading this other organization turned out to be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and that it ties into other shit. Then you see the merman's hand in the Dracula skull, and you're like, ooh, there's the tie-in to the Dark Universe. And you could have had the Mummy story stand on its own, but no, you try to tie everything in the center of the fucking movie to get people interested in shit that's probably not going to happen now, even though from what I've read it's still going to happen, even though the Mummy's bombed in the U.S. They're still going to go forward with everything else because apparently this movie did good overseas. But yeah, there were ways you could have saved this. First of all, cut back your budget on the big name actors. You don't need them to draw people in to see this shit. Could have got some lesser known guys. Like I said, you could have brought back Brendan Fraser. He probably would have worked really cheap because he hasn't been in anything in a long time. Focus more on this story and not try and tie everything in together. Learn from the other established universes, namely Marvel, since DC's having some issues. Marvel didn't try and tie in a bunch of shit in Iron Man that relates to the Hulk and Thor and all this other shit. It was little segments that were mentioned. That's why those movies did so well. It wasn't like, oh, by the way, here's a Captain America story in the middle of Iron Man. It was there, very subtly hinted at because the Shield appeared, but it wasn't the main focus of the middle of the movie before getting back to what was going on with Iron Man. Spend the extra money, work your scripts a little bit better to where the story makes sense and isn't convoluted and pointless. Get some cheaper actors so you have the budget to do that and actually make stuff look a little bit better. And it would probably be a solid universe. But the way you have everything structured right now isn't going to work. And it's kind of sad because I was kind of looking forward to what they were going to do with this Dark Universe thing. Even though I don't know where they're going with it, it would have been cool to go along on the ride and watch and see what would happen. But obviously, that's kind of all out the window now. So what would I give this one as far as a star rating? I'm really torn between if I want to give it a 2 or a 1.5. Because like I said, the story started out strong. If they would just stuck to that and had like a little after the credits scene bumper showing the other stuff, it would have been fine. But because it didn't know what it wanted to be, I feel like it's below middle of the road, which is why I was going for a 2. But I think there's so many glaring problems that they could easily fix. It doesn't deserve to be a 2, which is why I'm leaning more towards a 1.5. I don't think it's quite a 1, because like I said, there was something there that could have been fixed. But because they'd rather spend money on Tom Cruise being a big name actor instead of fixing the bullshit, it's going to get a 1.5. So there you have it. That's it for The Mummy. Again, as always, thank you guys for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share the video. Links are down in the description. Click the bell up there in the corner. Make sure you're getting notifications every time I post new content. And until next time, we'll see you after the credits.